Black pilot told to sit in economy, not knowing he's the owner's son. When Jordan Carter, a confident young pilot traveling incognito, took his seat in first class, he had no idea the journey would test more than just his patience. A flight attendant's startling assumption soon spiraled into an uncomfortable confrontation that left everyone questioning their own biases. How will Jordan handle this moment? And will the truth change everything? Jordan Carter leaned back in his chair at Gate 14 of Lincoln International Airport, savoring the rare anonymity of his position. At 29, Jordan had achieved more than most. He wasn't just a senior pilot with thousands of flight hours under his belt, but also the son of Kenneth Carter, the founder of Sky Blue Airlines, a name synonymous with luxury and reliability in the air travel industry. Dressed in a simple black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, Jordan blended effortlessly with the sea of travelers. His polished aviator sunglasses hung from the neckline of his shirt, and his carry-on, a sleek leather bag, sat at his feet. To anyone watching, he was just another young professional on a business trip. This was exactly how Jordan wanted it. He gazed around the bustling terminal, filled with the hum of conversations, the mechanical chimes of announcements, and the rhythmic clatter of suitcase wheels. Airports were his sanctuary. He'd grown up surrounded by the intoxicating energy of aviation. His father had taken him on his first flight at age 6, and since then, the roar of engines and the scent of jet fuel had been his calling. Today, however, was different. Jordan wasn't working this flight. Instead, he was flying as a passenger, an experiment to understand the sky blue experience from the other side of the cockpit door. This should be interesting, he murmured to himself, watching travelers rush to their gates. He remembered his father's words during their last conversation. The best leaders are those who see the world through the eyes of the people they serve. Jordan smiled at the thought. His father's legacy was more than just the airline. It was the values it stood for. Sky Blue Airlines prided itself on its commitment to inclusivity and excellence. Yet, like any company, it wasn't immune to human error or unconscious bias. Jordan believed that first-hand observation was the key to finding areas for improvement. The boarding announcement broke through his thoughts. Sky Blue Airlines Flight 271 to San Francisco is now boarding. First-class passengers, you are welcome to board at this time. Jordan grabbed his bag and joined the queue. He noticed the subtle glances from the other passengers in the line. First class on a Sky Blue flight was a luxury most reserved for executives, celebrities, or seasoned travelers. A young man in casual clothes wasn't the usual archetype. When he reached the gate agent, he handed over his boarding pass with a warm smile. The agent scanned it, and after a quick glance, smiled back. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Seat 2A, to your left." Jordan nodded and stepped into the jet bridge. The familiar scent of pressurized air filled his nostrils, evoking memories of his countless hours in the cockpit. He entered the cabin, his trained eyes quickly assessing the setup. First-class seats, upholstered in navy blue leather, were spacious and inviting. Each had a personal screen, a fully reclining option, and an array of comforts to make the hours fly by. Jordan placed his bag in the overhead bin and settled into his seat. 2A had always been his favorite, near the front but not too close to the galley. From here, he could observe everything discreetly. As the rest of the passengers boarded, Jordan allowed himself a moment of introspection. He thought of his childhood, of accompanying his father to the airline's headquarters. He'd watched Sky Blue grow from a small regional carrier to an international powerhouse, and he'd felt immense pride knowing his father had built something that stood for more than just profit. The last passengers trickled into the cabin, and the door was secured. Flight attendants began their routine, ensuring everyone was comfortable. Jordan noticed a blonde-haired woman moving efficiently through the cabin, her crisp uniform immaculate. Her name tag read Lisa. She seemed confident and capable, her demeanor radiating professionalism. Jordan hoped that her interaction with passengers reflected the same warmth he envisioned for his airline. The announcement from the cockpit crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. Welcome aboard Sky Blue Airlines Flight 271 to San Francisco." Jordan tuned out the familiar pre-flight speech, instead focusing on the details of his surroundings. He observed how the attendants interacted with passengers, how promptly they responded to requests, and even the cleanliness of the cabin. So far, everything seemed up to the high standards his father had always demanded. As the plane began taxiing, Jordan leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, prepared for the experience to unfold. This was a rare chance to see things from a different perspective, and he intended to make the most of it. What he didn't know was that this flight would be anything but ordinary. It wasn't the turbulence or mechanical issues that would mark this journey. No, the challenges on this flight would come from something far more insidious: assumptions. The aircraft reached cruising altitude smoothly, and the faint chime of the seatbelt sign deactivating echoed through the cabin. Passengers began settling into their in-flight routines. Some pulled out laptops, others scrolled through their phones, and a few reclined their seats, ready for a nap. Jordan stayed relaxed, his gaze wandering between the view outside the window and the subtle interactions unfolding around him. Lisa, the flight attendant Jordan had noticed earlier, moved with precision through the first-class cabin. Her experience was evident in her demeanor: quick, efficient, and composed. She exchanged pleasantries with passengers as she began the drink service, her polished smile unwavering. When she reached Jordan's row, her professional exterior faltered, if only slightly. Her eyes lingered on him for a beat too long, her expression hard to decipher. Jordan offered her a polite smile as she greeted him. "Good afternoon, sir," Lisa said, her tone polite but with an edge of hesitation. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Jordan tilted his head, slightly surprised. He reached into his pocket and handed over his boarding pass without protest. Lisa's eyes scanned the ticket, and her brow furrowed. "Seat 2, she murmured, almost to herself. Her gaze flicked between the ticket and Jordan, as if trying to reconcile the two. "Yes, that's correct," Jordan said evenly, his voice calm but firm. He sensed the shift in her demeanor, a subtle skepticism she couldn't quite conceal. "Are you sure this is your seat?" she asked, lowering her voice slightly, but not enough to keep nearby passengers from overhearing. "Perhaps you meant to book economy?" Jordan's smile faded, replaced by a measured expression. "This is my seat," he said, his tone carrying a quiet authority. "Is there a problem?" Lisa blinked, caught off guard by his calm response. We often have mix-ups with boarding passes," she stammered. "Maybe you should double-check." "There's no mix-up," Jordan interjected gently but firmly. "I assure you, this is my assigned seat." Around them, passengers began to notice the exchange. A man across the aisle peeked over his newspaper, his eyebrows raised. A woman in the row behind leaned forward slightly, curiosity plain on her face. The tension in the air was subtle but palpable. Lisa hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Jordan could see the wheels turning in her mind. To her, he was an anomaly, a young black man in casual clothes sitting in first class. It didn't fit the image she expected, and her assumptions were interfering with her professionalism. "I understand your concern," Jordan said, his tone measured, "but I believe my ticket confirms everything." Lisa's cheeks flushed, and she handed the boarding pass back to him. "Of course, sir," she said, a tight smile on her lips. "Please let me know if you need anything." Jordan nodded, slipping the ticket back into his pocket. "Thank you." As Lisa moved on to the next passenger, Jordan took a deep breath, trying to shake off the discomfort of the moment. He wasn't angry. He'd encountered situations like this before. Assumptions based on appearance were an unfortunate reality he had long learned to navigate. But in this instance, the setting made it sting more. This was his airline, his family's legacy, and yet here he was being questioned about his place in it. The murmurs around him grew louder. Passengers whispered to one another, and Jordan caught snippets of their conversations. "Did you see that? She really thought he didn't belong here. Honestly, it's embarrassing. What was she thinking? Maybe it was just a mistake." Jordan glanced around, noting the varied reactions. Some passengers looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting away when he glanced in their direction. Others seemed intrigued, openly observing him as though trying to decipher his story. He settled back in his seat, determined not to let the incident ruin his experience. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. A few minutes later, Lisa returned. Her expression was hesitant, her body language tense. "Sir, she said, her voice softer this time. "I just want to confirm one more thing. Could you please let me see your ID?" The whispers around them grew louder. This time, a man in the row behind spoke up. "Come on, give the guy a break. He already showed his ticket." Lisa shot the man a quick glance, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "It's just a routine check," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Jordan sighed, reaching for his wallet. He pulled out his ID and handed it to her without a word. Lisa examined it closely, her brow furrowing again. "This says Carter. Jordan Carter," she read aloud. Her gaze snapped back to him, her expression a mix of confusion and realization. "Are you?" Jordan held her gaze, his expression neutral. "Yes," he said simply. "Now, if you're satisfied, I'd like to enjoy the flight." Lisa's face flushed crimson as she handed the ID back. Of course, sir. My apologies." Jordan nodded, slipping his ID back into his wallet. He leaned back in his seat, his demeanor calm despite the tension that had now enveloped the cabin. As Lisa hurried away, Jordan couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. Here he was, a senior pilot and the son of the airline's founder. Yet assumptions about his appearance had led to this moment. He wondered how often other passengers experienced similar treatment, and how many of them lacked the means to push back. For the rest of the flight, Jordan resolved to let the situation play out naturally. He knew that revealing his full identity would shift the dynamic entirely, but he wanted to see how far Lisa's assumptions would take her, and what lessons might emerge from it. Unbeknownst to him, the most dramatic part of the journey was yet to come. The cabin had quieted after the earlier tension, though an undercurrent of curiosity still lingered among the passengers. Jordan remained calm, his hands resting lightly on the armrests of his seat. He'd been through moments like this before, moments where his calm confidence and poise were the only tools he had to defuse situations laced with prejudice. Lisa, however, was far from calm. As she continued her duties, her polished professionalism faltered. She glanced at Jordan more than once, her expression betraying a mixture of doubt and discomfort. The earlier confrontation seemed to weigh on her. As the meal service began, Lisa returned to first class with a cart of elegantly plated dishes. When she reached Jordan's row, she hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she set down his tray. "Your lunch, sir," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Thank you," Jordan replied evenly, his voice betraying none of the frustration he felt. He could sense her unease, and though part of him wanted to let it go, another part knew this was a teachable moment waiting to happen. Lisa moved down the aisle, but minutes later, she returned, her face set with an air of determination. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone clipped. "I need to verify one more thing with you." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" She clasped her hands together, her voice dropping. "I'd like to speak with the gate agent about your boarding pass, just to confirm everything." The subtle gasps from nearby passengers signaled their disbelief. Whispers rose once more, some passengers openly shaking their heads. "This is ridiculous," muttered the man across the aisle, his newspaper now folded in his lap. "Leave the poor guy alone." Jordan held up a hand to silence the man. "It's fine," he said calmly. "She's just doing her job." He turned back to Lisa. "But before you do that, I think it's time we clear this up." Lisa blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Clear what up?" Jordan reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out a sleek black case. He opened it to reveal his Sky Blue Airlines ID card and a lanyard emblazoned with the company's logo. He held it up for her to see. Jordan Carter, senior pilot, and son of Kenneth Carter, the founder of Sky Blue Airlines. Lisa's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process the revelation. A few passengers gasped audibly, and others leaned forward, eager to catch every detail of the unfolding drama. "Wait," the woman behind Jordan said, her voice rising. "Did he just say he's the owner's son?" Jordan nodded toward the woman, then turned back to Lisa. "That's correct. I'm flying today to observe the passenger experience firsthand." Lisa stumbled back a step, her face a mixture of horror and embarrassment. I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't mean." Jordan interrupted her with a calm but firm voice. You didn't mean to assume that I didn't belong here? That I was in the wrong place because of how I look? Lisa's hands shook as she clutched her service tray. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. This isn't just about me, Jordan said, his tone measured but resolute. It's about what those assumptions represent. You weren't rude, but you were quick to doubt me. Quick to think that someone like me couldn't possibly belong in first class. Do you understand how that feels? Lisa's eyes brimmed with tears, her professional demeanor completely unraveled. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize. The cabin was silent now, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Jordan let the pause linger, ensuring his words had time to sink in. Then he softened his tone. I'm not here to embarrass you, he said. I'm here to learn, and to help others learn too. We all make mistakes, Lisa. What matters is how we choose to grow from them. Lisa nodded quickly, her voice trembling as she said, Thank you for being so understanding. I promise, I'll do better. Jordan gave her a small nod. I believe you, and I hope this moment helps all of us reflect. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged glances, their earlier whispers now replaced with thoughtful expressions. A few offered murmurs of support, some clapping quietly in solidarity. The man across the aisle leaned toward Jordan. That was one hell of a way to handle it, he said. You've got my respect. Jordan offered a polite smile. Thank you. But this isn't about respect for me. It's about fairness and dignity for everyone. Lisa excused herself, retreating to the galley to compose herself. Jordan settled back into his seat, letting out a quiet sigh. He hadn't intended for the situation to escalate this far, but now that it had, he hoped it would serve as a moment of growth. Not just for Lisa, but for everyone on board. The rest of the meal service passed without incident, though the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers were more subdued, their interactions tinged with thoughtfulness. Jordan remained quiet, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of sky. He felt a mixture of emotions, pride in having handled the situation with grace, frustration that such moments were still necessary, and hope that perhaps this small incident could spark a larger conversation. He didn't know it yet, but the reflection sparked at 35,000 feet was about to ripple far beyond this flight. The hum of the engines filled the silence that had settled over the cabin. Passengers remained quiet, processing the events that had just unfolded. Jordan, still seated in 2A, stared out the window, the endless stretch of clouds serving as a backdrop to his thoughts. He was used to moments like this, moments where people had to confront their biases, whether they wanted to or not. What stood out about this one was its setting. His own airline, his own first-class cabin. It didn't take long for the reflective quiet to turn into hushed conversations. The man across the aisle leaned toward the woman beside him, whispering, Can you believe that? The son of the owner. The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. Makes you think about how often we jump to conclusions, doesn't it? I mean, Lisa was so polite, but you could see it. She just assumed. A few rows back, another passenger spoke louder, not caring if others overheard. It's not just her. We've all been guilty of it, haven't we? Seeing someone and making snap judgments. This is a wake-up call for me. Jordan listened without turning around. He didn't need to insert himself into these conversations. The incident had already done its work. People were thinking, reflecting, and hopefully learning. That was the real victory. Lisa returned to the cabin not long after. Her movements were slower, her usual brisk confidence replaced by a subdued, almost timid demeanor. When she reached Jordan's seat, she paused, clutching her notepad tightly. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice barely audible. Jordan turned to face her. Yes, she faltered, then took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. I want to apologize again. For everything. I realize now how wrong I was to make assumptions about you, or about anyone. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't professional. I am deeply sorry. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, Jordan saw not just an employee, but a human being grappling with her own flaws. He nodded, offering her a small smile. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your apology. Lisa hesitated, then added, I promise I'll do better. This has been eye-opening for me. and I hope you can forgive me. I already have, Jordan said gently. And I hope you'll take this experience with you, not just today, but every day. It's not easy to confront our biases, but it's necessary. For all of us. She nodded quickly, her relief evident. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Truly. As Lisa moved on to attend to other passengers, the man across the aisle leaned toward Jordan again. I have to say, the way you handled that grace under fire, a lot of people would have lost their cool. Jordan smiled faintly. Getting angry doesn't change minds. But conversations like this? They might. The man nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. Makes me wonder how many times I've made assumptions about someone without even realizing it. From the rows behind, a new voice chimed in. It's easy to do, isn't it? You see someone, and before they even speak, you've already decided who they are. I'm embarrassed to admit how often I've done it. Jordan turned slightly, observing the growing dialogue. Passengers were no longer whispering. They were openly discussing the incident, using it as a springboard for their own reflections. A woman in a tailored business suit shared a story about a time she'd been underestimated at work. Another passenger, a young man with a baseball cap, spoke about a friend who'd faced similar biases. Jordan felt a quiet satisfaction watching the ripple effect take hold. This was why his father had instilled in him the importance of leadership by example. Moments like this, small as they seemed, could inspire larger shifts in thinking. Lisa returned once more, this time with coffee. Compliments of the cabin crew, Mr. Carter, she said, her smile tentative but genuine. It's the least we can do. Thank you, Jordan said, accepting the cup. He glanced at her, then added, Lisa, I want you to know something. I've been in your shoes before, making a mistake, realizing it too late. What matters is how you move forward, and I can see you're ready to do that. Her smile widened, and she nodded. I am. Thank you for your understanding. As Lisa walked away, another passenger leaned forward from the row behind. Excuse me, Mr. Carter, he said hesitantly. I just wanted to say that this whole thing has really made me think. It's humbling, you know, how easy it is to assume things about people. Jordan turned, his expression open. We've all done it. What matters is recognizing it and making a conscious effort to do better. The man nodded, clearly moved. I'll remember that. The conversations continued throughout the flight, weaving a tapestry of personal reflections and shared experiences. By the time the plane began its descent, the cabin felt different. There was a quiet camaraderie among the passengers, an unspoken understanding that they'd all been part of something meaningful. Jordan leaned back in his seat, sipping his coffee as the plane dipped through the clouds. He thought about his father and the lessons he'd taught him. Lessons about humility, fairness, and the power of small moments to create change. This flight hadn't gone as Jordan had planned, but in a way, it had been even more impactful. As the landing gear deployed, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, signaling their approach to San Francisco. Jordan smiled to himself. The journey wasn't over yet, but the seeds of change had been planted. The plane descended smoothly, its wings cutting through layers of clouds until the San Francisco skyline came into view. The cabin lights brightened, signaling the final stretch of the journey. Around Jordan, the passengers shifted in their seats, buckling belts and gathering their belongings. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air, different now, softer, more reflective. The mood in the cabin had changed, and Jordan could feel it. Lisa returned to first class one last time, her expression resolute but tinged with humility. She stopped by Jordan's seat and hesitated before speaking. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice steady, I just wanted to thank you again, not just for your understanding, but for turning this into a learning experience, for me and, I think, for everyone on this flight. Jordan looked up at her, a warm but faint smile on his lips. I'm glad you see it that way, Lisa. Growth doesn't come without discomfort, but it's worth it. Her face softened, and she nodded. I'll remember that, and I'll make sure to carry it with me, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. She moved down the aisle, assisting other passengers with genuine care, her actions more deliberate than before. Jordan watched her, hopeful that the day's events would leave a lasting mark, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. As the plane touched down, the familiar sensation of landing, gravity pulling slightly forward, the engines reversing, made Jordan reflect on how this flight had mirrored a personal journey. Just as the plane had descended, grounding its passengers after soaring miles above the earth, so too had the incident brought people down to a place of self-awareness and introspection. Once the plane reached the gate, the passengers in first class stood to disembark. Many glanced at Jordan, their expressions a mix of gratitude and newfound respect. The man across the aisle extended his hand. "Jordan, right?" he said, his grip firm. "I just wanted to say what you did back there, the way you handled everything, it really stuck with me. It's rare to see someone lead with that kind of grace." Jordan shook his hand. "Thank you. But it wasn't just about me. I think we all took something away from this, didn't we?" The man nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Yeah, we did, and I'm going to remember it." As Jordan stepped into the jet bridge, a woman hurried to catch up to him. She was the passenger from a few rows back who had shared her story about being underestimated at work. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," she said, slightly out of breath. Jordan stopped, turning to her with a curious expression. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," she said earnestly. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for anyone who's ever been judged unfairly. That took courage." Jordan nodded, a quiet gratitude in his expression. "Thank you for saying that. I think the real courage comes from what we do next, how we take what we've learned and apply it." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You're right, and I'm going to do just that." As they parted ways, Jordan entered the terminal, the bustling energy of the airport wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. He felt lighter somehow, as though the weight of the earlier confrontation had transformed into something more purposeful. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. Later that day, Lisa sat in the crew lounge at the airport, replaying the events of the flight in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Jordan's calm, unwavering presence, or the way he had turned a tense situation into an opportunity for growth. Determined to take accountability, she composed an email to her manager, detailing the incident and outlining steps she wanted to take to ensure it wouldn't happen again. A week later, an article appeared on SkyBlue Airlines' internal blog. Written anonymously by a flight attendant, it recounted an experience of unconscious bias and the lessons learned from it. The piece ended with a powerful statement. "As airline staff, we have the privilege of serving passengers from all walks of life. It's our responsibility to treat each one with dignity and respect, no matter what assumptions we might unconsciously hold." The article went viral among SkyBlue employees, sparking conversations in break rooms, team meetings, and training sessions. The airline's leadership took notice, and soon, plans were underway to integrate unconscious bias training into staff development programs. Meanwhile, passengers from the flight found themselves reflecting on the incident long after they had landed. The man across the aisle told the story to his family over dinner, using it to teach his children about the dangers of judging others too quickly. The woman in the business suit shared her experience with her colleagues, encouraging them to speak up when they witnessed unfair treatment. And Jordan? He returned to his role as a senior pilot with a renewed sense of purpose. He continued to fly, not just to navigate planes through the sky, but to navigate people toward understanding. On a crisp morning months later, Jordan stood in SkyBlue's headquarters, addressing a room full of new employees during their orientation. His voice was steady, carrying the same calm authority he displayed on that flight. "We're more than an airline," he told them. "We're a reflection of the world we live in. And every passenger we serve deserves to feel valued, respected, and seen. That's not just a policy, it's a promise. One that starts with each of us." As he looked out at the eager faces of the recruits, Jordan felt a deep sense of hope. The journey toward fairness and equality was far from over, but he knew it was one worth taking, one flight, one conversation, one small moment at a time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.